Welcome back. I'm Neil Chase, author of Iron Dogs and writer-director of the upcoming action horror movie Contamination. And today we're talking about one of the most layered and emotionally complex villain types in fiction, the anti-villain. Now, if you've been following my villain archetype series, you already know that a good villain doesn't have to twirl a mustache or cackle in a thunderstorm. Sometimes the best villains are the ones who almost feel like the hero, except for one small thing: the way they go about it. That's the anti-villain in a nutshell. So let's break down exactly what makes this archetype work and how you can use it to bring depth, tension, and moral ambiguity to your own stories. And if you're writing your own villain or just love the kind that makes your audience question everything, well, stick around till the end because I'll be sharing 3 pro tips to help you write an anti-villain who's not just complex, but unforgettable. But first, let's zoom out for a second and look at the differences between heroes and anti-heroes and then between villains and anti-villains, because those comparisons matter. So grab your popcorn, let's get started. Now, a hero is usually someone we admire. They're selfless, brave, morally upright. Think Superman, Frodo Baggins, Captain America. They do the right thing for the right reasons. But an anti-hero? Well, that's someone who's still the protagonist, still doing something heroic, but their methods, personality, or ethics are a little, shall we say, off. Maybe they lie, maybe they kill, maybe they only help others to serve their own goals. They're the right person doing the wrong things, but for the right reasons. Now flip that. A villain is someone who actively opposes the hero, usually with evil or selfish intent. They want power, control, destruction, whatever their thing is. And they really don't care who they hurt to get there. But the anti-villain? Well, that's where things get interesting. The anti-villain is still the antagonist, still opposing the hero. But they're not evil for the sake of it. In fact, they might even have noble goals, a compelling backstory, even a good heart buried under layers of trauma or bitterness. They're the wrong person doing the right things, or at least trying to. But their methods are flawed, their morals are twisted, or they feel trapped by circumstances they can't escape. Another way to think of it: the anti-hero is a good person with villainous or immoral tendencies. The anti-villain is a bad person with justifiable or noble tendencies, maybe even a good side. One does the wrong thing for the right reason, whereas the other tries to do the right thing, but for the wrong reason, or can't help doing the wrong thing even if they wish they could stop. And that tension, that conflict, well, that's why the anti-villain can be so fascinating. This is the killer with a code, the villain who regrets the path they're on but keeps going, the criminal who's got just enough humanity that you can't fully root against them. They're not monsters. They're people. Flawed, tragic, sometimes likable, sometimes horrifying. And like anti-heroes, always complicated. So what is an archetype anyway? Well, an archetype is a recurring character type that shows up across cultures, time periods, and genres. They're familiar, and that's the point. Writers use them as a framework, and then add their own twist. Archetypes aren't boxes, they're starting points, and few give you more room to play than the anti-villain. Now, hero archetypes evolve. They grow, overcome flaws, and change for the better. Villain archetypes resist change. They double down, they chase their goals regardless of the cost. But the anti-villain is stuck in the middle. They might recognize their flaws or even hate themselves for what they do, but they feel trapped, or justified, or even too far gone to turn back. At their core, the anti-villain is a morally compromised character who still has relatable, sometimes even noble motivations. They're often dangerous, criminal, immoral, or just flat out evil, but with a side of sympathy, logic, or even charm. See, they might want to be evil, but it's just that they can't extinguish the spark of goodness that's still inside them. You don't root for them because they're evil. You root for them in spite of it. Sometimes you even hope they get a second chance. Anti-villains tap into our love for complexity. They're not typical bad guys. They're conflicted, self-aware. Sometimes they're even more emotionally vulnerable than the heroes. They remind us that real people, like real villains, aren't always black and white. They challenge us. They make us uncomfortable. They make us ask, what would I do in that situation? And best of all, they add layers of depth to your story. A great anti-villain can be an antagonist that's more memorable than your protagonist. Or sometimes the anti-villain is the protagonist. And that's when the story really gets interesting. Because of this, the anti-villain has some key strengths. First is their sympathetic motivation. At their core, antivillains aren't just evil for the sake of evil. They have clear goals that, at least on the surface, make sense. Maybe they're fighting oppression. Maybe they're trying to protect someone they love. Maybe they're just surviving in a world that's done them dirty. What makes this powerful is that the audience doesn't just understand them, they empathize. That emotional gray area creates internal conflict for the viewer, which means your story now has an extra layer of depth. A great example is Eric Killmonger in Black Panther. His pain is real. His rage is justified. He was abandoned. His family was wronged. And he sees injustice everywhere. But his tactics are brutal and extreme. We don't want him to succeed, but we get why he's doing it. Next is their self-awareness and inner conflict. Some anti-villains know they're the villain, and they hate themselves for it. That awareness either haunts them or fuels them, and this creates tension and unpredictability. They might wrestle with guilt, show hesitation, or carry deep wounds that explain their behavior. Will they back down? Will they snap? Will they change? We're never sure. Just look at Severus Snape in Harry Potter. We think he's evil for most of the series. He lives in the shadows, appearing cruel and bitter, but everything he does is motivated by guilt, loss, and unrequited love. He secretly sacrifices everything to protect the child of the woman he once loved. He never gets closure, never asks for recognition. He just carries the weight and does what's required, no matter the personal cost. Then there's their charisma or intelligence. Great antivillains are often just as watchable, if not more so, than the heroes. And why? Well, because they're usually smart, they're interesting, and they have a certain charm that draws us in, even when we know they're dangerous. They tend to dominate the screen or page with presence and moral ambiguity. The audience can't help but be fascinated by how they think, how they talk, and what they'll do next. Just look at Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. He's a cannibal serial killer, but also a genius psychiatrist with impeccable manners and taste. And more than that, he shows a soft spot for Clarice that goes against the stone-cold killer mentality he exhibits with every single other character in the story. Every line of dialogue is laced with tension, and because of it, you can't look away. And finally, there's their chance for redemption. The most effective anti-villains aren't the ones who act out of chaos. They're the ones who find a moment of goodness to shine through, and then make us wonder if they'll act upon it. For the most part, they are firmly on the side of evil, but there comes a point when they recognize the cost of their actions and must decide if they'll do what's right for once. Not only does this make them question their own beliefs, but it forces your hero and your audience to do the same. A great example of this is Gru in Despicable Me. Gru's only wish is to be the world's greatest villain. He revels in every crime and evil act he performs. He even adopts 3 orphans in order to help execute his dastardly plans. But the last thing he expects is to start caring for them. And when he does, he's faced with the most difficult decision of his life: realizing his dreams or making new ones. And this leads to some notable weaknesses. The first is moral compromise. See, they might be trying to live up to the expectations of others, but morality keeps them from going all in. Or they might have a noble goal, but their methods poison it. The line between right and wrong and whatever gets the job done blurs to such a degree that it can lead to their downfall. Just look at Dexter Morgan in Dexter. He only kills murderers and serial killers. He follows a code. But as the series goes on, he starts making exceptions and concessions. He justifies more and more. Lies pile up, and innocent people pay the price. And eventually, he's not really that different from the people he hunts. Then there's their isolation and alienation. Because of their choices, their guilt, secrets, or even just their worldview, anti-villains often isolate themselves from friends, allies, or anyone who could pull them back. They end up operating alone, either by necessity or self-sabotage. And this loneliness can become a fatal flaw. Just look at Clubber Lang in Rocky III. He's not evil, he simply wants what's been denied him all along: a shot at the title. And he'll resort to whatever means he can to get it. And once he has it, well, he'll do anything to hold on to it. He trains alone, lives alone, and fights alone. He pushes away everyone in his life in pursuit of this otherwise noble goal, and it leaves him vulnerable when he needs help the most. Next is their tragic inevitability. Sometimes their fate is sealed the moment the story begins. Their wounds run deep, too deep. Their trauma controls them. Even if they want redemption, they can't grasp it. They're stuck in a cycle, aware of the cliff they're heading towards, but unable to stop themselves. No matter how noble they become or how much they want to change, they're usually too far gone. Is there a better example than Patrick Bateman in American Psycho? He's numb, hollow, and violent. He narrates his own emptiness with chilling detachment. There's no redemption here, just a man trapped in his own soulless decay. And the scariest part? He knows it. And even when he tries to stop, he can't. And finally, there's their conflicted loyalties. Anti-villains often walk a thin line between loyalty and betrayal, whether that's to a cause, a person, or even themselves. When push comes to shove, they can flip sides, hesitate at a key moment, or let emotion override logic. This can add richness to the story, or completely unravel their plans. Just look at Mr. White in Reservoir Dogs. He's a criminal, yes, but he's also fiercely loyal. That loyalty to Mr. Orange, the undercover cop, becomes his undoing. He lets emotion and a rigid personal code cloud his judgment, and it ends in betrayal from both sides. And here's some more unforgettable anti-villains and why they work. Vincent in Pulp Fiction. Vincent Vega is a hitman, no question. But he's not a cold-blooded killer for the thrill of it. He's thoughtful, oddly polite, even spiritual at times. He debates morality over cheeseburgers and worries about taking another man's wife out to dinner. He's a bad man with very human instincts, constantly towing the line between duty and personal doubt. Jules in Pulp Fiction. Unlike Vincent, Jules shows growth. He starts as a killer quoting scripture like a threat, but by the end, he's actually listening to the words. His journey towards self-awareness and redemption is what makes him the more obvious anti-villain of the two. Someone trying to walk away from a life of violence, even if he's done awful things to get there. Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter. Draco starts off as the schoolyard villain, petty, elitist, and cruel. But as the stakes rise, we see cracks. He doesn't want to kill Dumbledore. He's scared, pressured by legacy and circumstance. He's a kid born into a toxic ideology, and by the final films, it's clear he was never cut out to be the monster others wanted him to become. Magneto in the X-Men. One of the most iconic anti-villains ever written. Magneto is driven by the real-world trauma of surviving the Holocaust and vows never to let it happen again. He believes mutants must rise up to avoid extinction, and while his methods often tip into villainy, his motives come from fear, grief, and survival. He's not evil. He's angry, and he just might be right. Megamind in Megamind. A villain by design, Megamind literally sets out to lose, but when he finally wins, he realizes being the bad guy isn't fulfilling. His emotional need to belong, to be seen as more than a reject, well, it drives his whole story. He's charming, misunderstood, and ultimately redeems himself, proving he was never really a true villain to begin with. Kronk in The Emperor's New Groove. Kronk works for the villain, sure, but his heart clearly isn't in it. He talks to shoulder angels, cares about people's feelings, and makes a mean spinach puff. His moral compass is wildly intact, even when he's technically on the wrong side, which makes him a lovable and comedic anti-villain, more misguided than malicious. Tyler Durden in Fight Club. Tyler starts out as a liberator, tearing down consumer culture and preaching radical freedom. But over time, his ideology becomes a cult of violence. He appeals to primal instincts, to disenfranchised men, but he also embodies unchecked chaos and toxic ego. He's a revolutionary turned tyrant, and the fact that he's part of the narrator's psyche adds even more moral complexity. The anti-villain might not be your big bad with the world domination plan. They might not even think of themselves as the villain at all. And that's kind of the point. They're great because they live in that gray area, because they make us feel something. And because even when we hate what they're doing, there's part of us that kind of hopes they'll turn it around. So how can you write an anti-villain that stands out from the crowd? Well, here's 3 quick tips. First, start with the wound. not the crime. A memorable anti-villain doesn't start with evil. They start with pain. Maybe it's trauma, loss, injustice, betrayal, or just years of being powerless. That emotional wound is what drives their choices, even the horrible ones. And when the audience understands why they became who they are, they stay emotionally invested, even as the character spirals. Think of Magneto in the X-Men. He's a survivor terrified of seeing history repeat itself and will do anything to protect his people, even if it means becoming the thing he hates. So ask yourself, what broke this character? What fear or belief keeps them doing what they're doing? Next, let them challenge the hero's values. Great anti-villains force your protagonist to question themselves. They might expose a blind spot in the hero's worldview or offer a twisted version of the hero's own goals or actions. When written well, the anti-villain becomes a mirror, one that reflects what the hero could become under different circumstances. Think of Roy Batty in Blade Runner. He's violent, sure, but he also makes the hero question what it means to be human and whether he's really any better. So ask yourself, in what way is this anti-villain right? Even if just a little. And finally, give them a moment of doubt or clarity. Not every anti-villain needs a redemption arc, but they should have a moment, a look, a pause, a line of dialogue where we see the cracks, where we wonder, could they have chosen differently? It's that hesitation or flicker of guilt that turns a stock villain into someone who could be unforgettable. Just think of Snape's death in Harry Potter. It recontextualizes everything. We see his pain, his loyalty, and his choices. And suddenly we realize he was fighting a different kind of battle all along. So ask yourself, what moment lets us glimpse their humanity, even if they keep doing the wrong thing? Because the anti-villain isn't your average bad guy. They're conflicted, tragic, dangerous, and sometimes even redeemable. So write them with honesty, give them depth, and most of all, let them challenge you as a writer to think beyond black and white. But hey, these are just my 2 cents. Give me yours. Let me know in the comments below who stands out to you as a prime example of an anti-villain and why. And hey, if you found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more villain breakdowns like the Mastermind or the Beast, and ring that bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And while you're at it, be sure to grab a copy of my novel Iron Dogs or stream Spin the Wheel on Tubi to see some of my villains in action. And as always, if you're looking for a deeper level of help with your own story, contact me on my webpage, neilchasefilm.com, through the link below. I've helped writers, filmmakers, and producers improve their work on everything from the characters and pacing to the dialogue and action. So until next time, stay creative.